The slap cracked through the courtroom, sharp enough to slice the air in two. Mother's glasses skittered across the polished floor, catching the harsh light before coming to rest against a wooden bench. The smell of varnished oak and old paper clung heavy in my lungs. I rose slowly, my duty belt tugging at my hip, every ounce of its weight reminding me that I was no longer the silent child in that kitchen. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, striking the brim of my police cap resting in my hand. I placed it on the table with deliberate care, the sound a muted gavel calling the room to order. My voice followed, low but edged with steel. "Your Honor, please check the last page." Across the aisle, my father's head snapped toward me. The color drained from his face as the clerk's fingers rustled through the stack of papers. The gallery stilled, breaths held in the heavy silence. For years, he had spoken and we had swallowed it. But this time, the silence was mine, sharpened, weaponized, ready to cut. And when the final page turned, it wasn't just evidence that surfaced. It was the unmasking of a man who had hidden behind fear for too long. My name is Anna Callahan, 30 years old, police officer, sworn to uphold the law. Yet today, I sit in this courtroom not as an officer, but as a daughter. The badge on my chest gleams, cold and steady, a contrast to the tremor in my mother's hands beside me. The world knows me as calm, disciplined, the one who arrives when chaos breaks out. But before the uniform, before the badge, I was the quiet child of a violent house. That history sits here with me, heavy as the leather of my belt and the faint, metallic tang of handcuffs brushing my side. Across the aisle, my father lounges in his chair, arrogance draped over him like a second skin. He leans back, smirk curling, while his mistress adjusts her perfume-heavy scarf and drums her nails against the table. Their confidence reeks. Too loud, too sure, like cheap cologne trying to mask rot. And then there's my mother. Blue dress with faded flowers, hair pinned neatly, lips pressed together as if holding back the tremor of decades. She doesn't look like a warrior, but I know better. She has carried storms inside her for years, bending without breaking, enduring what no one should have to. My younger sister, Leah, isn't here today. She couldn't bear it, the sight of him, the weight of her own memories. So I carry her absence like an invisible witness. This courtroom is polished, solemn, full of murmurs from strangers waiting for their turn at judgment. But for me, this is no ordinary case. This is the reckoning of a family's history, written not in ink, but in bruises, silence, and survival. And as the bailiff calls order and the judge settles in, I know one thing with absolute certainty. My father thinks he's in control. He thinks today will end with my mother defeated and discarded. But he has forgotten that silence, when forged long enough, can turn into steel. I was 8 years old when I first understood that silence could be a weapon. The kitchen smelled of burnt toast and stale coffee left too long on the stove. Frost feathered the window, thin white veins tapping against the glass in the winter wind. Mom moved carefully, her sleeves tugged down, trying to hide the deep purple bruise blooming across her wrist. She set 2 bowls of cereal on the table, folding a smile over her pain. "Eat before it gets soggy," she whispered. Then the door slammed open, boots stomping heavy on linoleum. My father stormed in, a weather system in flannel, eyes sharp with thunder. "Where's my thermos?" he barked. "On the counter," Mom answered softly. He grabbed it, gaze dropping to her covered wrist. "Clumsy again?" "I dropped a pan," she murmured. His laugh was a sneer. "Figures. Can't even make breakfast without screwing it up." He shoved the toast so hard crumbs scattered across the table. His eyes flicked toward me and my sister Leah, then back to Mom. "I'm not raising 2 useless princesses who'll turn out just like you." And then he was gone, the door slamming behind him, rattling the walls, leaving silence in its wake. Mom dabbed at the counter with a napkin, as if wiping could erase what hung in the air. "He's just tired," she said, but her voice was thin, brittle. "He doesn't have to be cruel," I whispered. Her eyes lowered. "Finish up. School starts soon." On the walk to school, the cold bit at our ankles, Leah's bootlaces trailing behind her like black tails. She looked at me, small and uncertain. "Is Mom okay?" I lied, polishing the words like a coin. "She's tough." That afternoon, I stared at a shop window where a TV flickered. A police officer stood behind yellow tape, calm, collected, unshaken. Something clicked inside me, like a lock sliding into place. That night, the kitchen smelled of cornbread. Mom touched my cheek and asked about school. We learned about Harriet Tubman. Brave doesn't have to be loud. Her eyes softened. "You're right." But the peace shattered again when Dad stumbled in, reeking of beer and cheap whiskey. His keys fumbled at the lock, his jaw already twisted in anger. He spotted the cornbread, his words trying to make up for this morning. "It's cornbread," Mom said gently. "You like it with honey." "I like a woman who knows her place." His hand shot out, smacking the plate from her grip. It shattered on the tile, crumbs scattering like yellow confetti from a party no one wanted. Leah screamed. I shouted back, "Stop." The word hung in the air, a fragile line in the sand. Dad turned, startled that a child had dared to exist. His laughter was cruel, wet with alcohol. "Hear that? She thinks she's a cop." Mom stepped between us so quickly her shadow split me in two. "Please, just go lie down. I'll clean this." He shouldered past her, muttering curses. She knelt on the floor, gathering shards of ceramic until the sharp edges caught into her hands. I crouched beside her. "You don't have to take this." Her voice was steady but hollow. "You and Leah need a roof. If I leave, where do we go?" I had no answer. So we cleaned the kitchen together, breathing in rhythm like swimmers beneath the same wave. And in that moment, I understood. Silence wasn't peace. It was survival. That night, as I lay in bed listening to the walls tremble with his snores, I made a quiet promise to myself. One day, I would be the person who arrives and says, "Enough." Years rolled forward, but the pattern never changed. Anger, silence, apology, repeat. Each cycle wore deeper grooves into our lives, like ruts on an unpaved road. By the time I was a teenager, Mom's bruises had become seasonal, fading from purple to yellow just in time to be replaced by fresh marks. Dad's cruelty sharpened as his pride shrank. He came home later, smelling of cologne too sharp for the factory floor, his shirts pressed a little too neatly. Mom noticed, of course. Wives always do. She folded laundry with trembling hands as his phone whispered with another woman's voice. The affair started as a shadow, then became a presence that strutted into our home with his arrogance. I hated him more for that than for the bruises. Not just the betrayal, but the smugness of it. The way he laughed in our faces while Mom served him dinner like dignity wasn't bleeding at her feet. One night, Leah burst into tears over her algebra homework. Dad barked across the room, "Figures, you're useless, just like your mother." Mom crossed the space before I could react. She wrapped her arms around Leah, whispering into her hair, "You are not useless. You are light. You are mine." In that moment, I realized Mom wasn't powerless. She fought in small ways, shielding, affirming, planting seeds of worth that Dad could never uproot. But his threats grew heavier. Divorce papers appeared, tossed onto the kitchen counter like dirty laundry. "Sign them," he snapped. "The girls have grown. You're not needed anymore." Mom's hands shook as she turned the pages, lips moving silently over the lines. "I don't want this," she whispered. His laugh was cruel, oily. "Since when do you get to want anything?" Later that night, I found her on the back porch, arms wrapped around herself as if the night air might swallow her whole. "I can't fight him, Anna," she said, voice breaking. If he wants divorce, he'll take it all. The house, the savings. I don't have the strength. I swallowed the fire in my throat. You don't have to fight him alone. You have me. Her smile was weary, almost broken. You're my strength, but I can't drag you into this. But she already had. Years ago, when his hand first struck her, when his words first branded her, I knew then that his arrogance wasn't just cruelty, it was a challenge. He believed her silence would last forever. He believed we would always stay small. He was wrong. Because the storm he thought he controlled had been breeding its counterforce for years, and I was ready to unleash it. If he wanted a war, then it wouldn't be fought with fists. It would be fought with facts. I was no longer the frightened child hiding in a closet. I was a police officer in training, learning the law, learning patience, learning how to build a case one piece at a time. And so I began. I started with photographs, snapshots of bruises I had taken over the years, the faint outline of a handprint on Mom's cheek, the swollen curve of her wrist, each one dated, cataloged. Next came hospital receipts, sprained ribs, fractured fingers, injuries that never matched the stories Dad fed the nurses. Neighbors had called the police more than once. I requested the records through official channels. Reports of shouting, broken glass, a woman's voice crying. Each time, Mom refused to press charges, but the pattern was unmistakable. I gathered those too. At night, when the house was quiet, except for the ticking of the clock and Mom's soft weeping through the wall, I spread papers across my desk, arranging them like pieces of a puzzle. A bruise here, a receipt there, each shard of truth sharpened into a blade. The finances told their own story. Bank withdrawals lining up with hotel receipts, jewelry purchases, transfers into Miss Avery's account. Her mistress wasn't just a stain on our family, she was siphoning our future. I traced every dollar, stapled every receipt, until the ledger painted him guilty in black and white. But evidence wasn't enough. I needed timing. I needed the moment when silence would break and the truth would be undeniable. The courtroom was the perfect stage. He had chosen it to humiliate Mom, to strip her of everything. He thought it would be his victory lap. He never considered it might become his trial. I slipped the folder into my Academy-issued case file, locking it with the precision I had practiced on weapons and restraints. This was my arsenal now. Not bullets, not batons, but paper, ink, and the law. Still, the preparation wasn't only in documents. It was in me. Morning runs until my lungs burned, late nights studying statutes until the words etched themselves into my memory. Calm drilled into me until it felt like muscle memory. Because when the day came, when he raised his voice and thought the room belonged to him, I would be ready. He thought Mom's silence was her weakness. He didn't realize it was the soil where my strength had been growing all along. The courthouse smelled of polish and dust, like old wood soaked with decades of anger and hope. Sunlight slanted through tall windows, casting long bars of light across the floor, as if even the sun were holding judgment. Strangers whispered on benches, waiting for their own cases. But for me, every sound blurred into the hammering of my pulse. Mom sat beside me at the plaintiff's table. Her hands twisted a tissue into shreds, her blue dress chosen carefully, though it did little to hide the sleepless nights etched beneath her eyes. Across the aisle, my father leaned back in his chair with the swagger of a man who believed he had already won. His mistress, Avery, perched beside him like a gaudy ornament, perfume so sharp it sliced through the air, nails drumming the table in contempt. The judge entered, robes trailing like shadows. The bailiff called the room to order. My hand brushed against the brim of my police cap, tucked neatly on the table. Its weight was small but symbolic, a reminder of the oath I carried with me, even here as a daughter. The proceedings began. My father's lawyers spoke with slick confidence, parroting his lies. This woman has contributed nothing. She lived freely off my client's labor. She deserves nothing." The words echoed off the walls like blows. Mom flinched with each one, her tissue tearing apart in trembling fingers. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, her lips parted, then closed. Her shoulders curled inward. "I just want peace," she whispered. My father smirked, leaning toward the gallery as if to broadcast her submission. "See, she admits she has no fight in her." Avery's laugh was low and poisonous. Every instinct in me screamed to stand, but timing mattered. I waited. The air tightened, thick as storm clouds before lightning. Then he pushed too far. Leaning across the table, his voice carrying for the whole courtroom to hear, he spat the word that had followed us like a curse. "Useless." And then his hand struck. The sound cracked like a rifle shot. Mom's glasses slid across the floor. Gasps erupted. The bailiff moved, but the judge raised a hand. Silence fell, stunned and brittle. Mom reached shakily for the pen again, as though signing her own erasure would end the storm. That was my moment. My chair scraped back, the sound sharp as a blade unsheathed. Every head turned as I rose, straight-backed, the years of discipline pressing through my stance. I lifted the cap from the table, its brim biting into my palm. Slowly, deliberately, I set it down before me. "Your Honor," I said, my voice even but carrying, "please check the last page." The rustle of paper filled the room. My father's smirk faltered. Avery froze mid-drum of her nails. And for the first time, Mom looked up, confusion and fragile hope flickering in her eyes. This was no longer just a hearing. It was the unveiling. The judge's brow furrowed as his eyes scanned the final pages. Photographs slid free, bruises, cuts, hospital records stamped with dates. Neighbors' statements stapled together, bank records lined with withdrawals and hotel receipts. Even the audio transcripts, his voice dripping with contempt, captured word for word. The silence in the courtroom thickened, a collective breath caught in the throat of justice itself. My father's face shifted. The smug veneer cracked into something raw, panic trying to wear anger as a mask. He think that uniform makes you someone? You're still my little girl. You'll always do as I say." I stepped between him and my mother, my shoulders squared, my pulse iron steady. "No," I said, voice sharp as steel. "Not anymore." He lunged, arm whipping back, the same hand I had seen raised 1,000 times in kitchens, hallways, shadows of our home. But this time, I didn't flinch. The bailiff seized him. Metal cuffs clamped down with a final click, the sound ringing like a clock striking the hour it had promised all along. The mistress shrank into her seat, her perfume sour in the stagnant air. The gallery sat in stunned silence, eyes wide, some nodding, some simply staring. For the first time, power shifted visibly, like gravity itself had tilted away from him. I turned to Mom. She sat trembling, the tissue shredded to confetti in her lap. Her cheek was still flushed from the slap, but her chin was lifted now, if only slightly. I leaned close, my voice low enough for her alone. "It's over, Mom. You don't have to take it anymore." Her hand found mine, grip surprisingly strong. Her whisper carried further than his shouts ever had. "Anna, you stood up." And in that instant, everyone in the room understood. The silence that once kept us captive had become the blade that cut him down. The judge's gavel fell, each strike echoing like a seal on history. "Protective measures are granted. Mr. Callahan, you are barred from the marital home pending full review. Financial misconduct will be examined. The evidence stands." My father's voice sputtered into curses, but the clink of cuffs silenced him better than any argument ever could. Outside the courthouse, the sky wore that pale, scrubbed color it takes after a storm. Mom's steps beside me were small, uncertain, but her hand didn't tremble in mine anymore. For decades, she had carried fear like a second skin. Today, for the first time, it began to peel away. When we walked back into the house, silence greeted us, but not the heavy silence of waiting for violence. This silence was lighter, almost fragile, as though the walls themselves were learning what peace felt like. Leah rushed into Mom's arms, tears wetting her shoulder. "He can't hurt you anymore," she whispered, and Mom, lifting her chin, answered, "Not anymore." Weeks later, when the final ruling granted her the house and restitution, Mom placed the deed on the kitchen table like sacred scripture. She ran her fingers over the embossed seal, her eyes glistening. "I never thought I'd hold this." I shook my head softly. "You held us, Mom. This is only proof." At night, I sometimes sit on the porch where she once cried alone. The wood is weathered, scarred, but no longer haunted. I watch the steady glow of the streetlight, not the flicker of danger, but the calm of protection. People imagine revenge as fire, loud, consuming, devoured everything in its path. But the truest revenge is quieter. It is the silence of a woman who no longer trembles, the stillness of a daughter who no longer flinches, the calm after the storm, when the house still stands and the air smells like freedom. Endurance was never weakness. It was strength, waiting for its moment. And when that moment came, we stood tall, together.